But so there's a very basic format for each week, and that we'll spend a little bit of time getting to know some types of poem, and then we will discuss and compare it to sort of lyric writing and how we think it can inform one another. And then we'll make the last bit won't take very long because we'll probably do it more in between sessions, which is sort of more personal and practical. And I think this week it's literally just to have a go at one of the types of poetry. But then the more we get on, I'd be interested to see how we can use this to help with our lyric writing. So it's more, I guess, to me, it's using little exercises that change how our mind works. And if we can really, because we started to really delving quite deep with how we write lyrics and how we approach them. But the 4 weeks were kind of general. And so we were hoping that with this, we can really start to think more specifically about rhyming and rhythm, and even the rhythm of words, which we don't really think of. Well, I don't really think of when I write lyrics, but in poetry, the rhythm of it is quite important. I found out about a thing called, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's spelt MORAS, which is essentially, it's a unit of rhythm that's really similar to a syllable. So in a haiku, which is those ones, people do them on Instagram quite a lot, and they'll just write a little haiku, and people they can be really interesting, and I think they can be quite beautiful in their own way, but they're so short, they're only 3 lines, and then there's it's 5, 7, and then 5. So the first line is 5 of these things that are syllables but aren't syllables, and then 7, and then 5. On the cheat sheet that I'll send out afterwards, I've put some examples in, and we'll try to find some that I'd never heard of before. So, for example, if we wanted to have a go at writing one of these afterwards, a haiku could be really interesting. Firstly, it's quite short, so it wouldn't necessarily take you very long, but because it's so short, there's a lot of thought that you have to put into what's coming across, and it can be quite meaningful without actually saying a lot, which was really interesting when I was reading through them, how much they can mean without really saying a lot. I think it can be quite interesting. So haiku is one of the ones that I looked up. Another one, which is arguably could be short or long, but an acrostic poem, which is the one where the first letter of each line makes a word. And I remember doing this in primary school and secondary school, and having to do acrostic poems. And I think for me, maybe it's tainted that idea of it a little bit. I don't know if I feel a bit weird about doing it now, but that's kind of why I put it in. It has it has a feeling of immaturity because we did it in school, but actually you could probably do something quite interesting with it. And again, if it as simple as you've written this song and you're really struggling with lyrics, and you just go, I'm just gonna write an acrostic, because there's, you choose a word, and then for each letter of that word you write a line starting with that letter, and you've already got a starting point. So it's not like having to fish words out of thin air. You've got, I don't know, something to start with, I guess. So I thought that could be quite interesting. And the one that's the most difficult, that I don't understand massively, but is a sonnet. So a sonnet is 14 lines, and each line is 10 syllables. But the thing that makes it really difficult, and the thing that I struggle with, is Ironbic Pentameter, which I can't say. Ironbic Pentameter. Can't say it. You know what I mean? The thing that Shakespeare used, it's what he's known for. And as far as I could research, it's essentially different. There's a really specific way that syllables are stressed or unstressed. So I think it starts with an unstressed syllable, and then a stressed syllable right after. Like it's very like specific. And I would love to have a go at doing one, but they sound terrifying. But that kind of and this is why I thought it was interesting. It's something I quite like to talk about in terms of how you could maybe apply this with lyrics, or if you think there are similar restrictions on lyrics to anything from these particular styles, is that like Ironbic Pentameter, sounds wrong, that second word. Anyway, like writing in that form is really restrictive, and arguably not restriction isn't a bad thing in this sense, but like there's a very clear way to do it. And there are a lot of people that write sonnets without being really strict with how they do it. And also with sonnets specifically, I read that they're also known as a little song. So it'd be really interesting because I don't know about you, but if you, that I remember once someone in school gave me a poem and said, I thought you could use these for lyrics in a song. And I was like, yeah, okay. And I tried it and I was like, this is weird. Like, this is so weird. It's really it's a really interesting way to put stuff to music. But obviously for now we're sort of ignoring the music side to it and focusing more on the lyrics. So those are like the three sort of short form poetry styles that I had a look at. I've got the link that I used for my information, that if you want I can send that over. And there's also something I read about couplets, which is like rhyming, like it's like 2 lines successively in a verse, and they can rhyme or they cannot rhyme. But so it's essentially just a word describe, like it's more of a describing word of like an aspect of poetry and lyrics and any kind of written stuff, I guess. But also I thought it was something that could be useful to bear in mind when writing lyrics, because I think often we go, oh, so either the two next to each other rhyme, or it's like one underneath it that will rhyme and like will do like a weird thing. And sometimes you do the thing where you have a word and then it rhymes with another word that's like in the middle of a sentence. But I think we do all these things without realizing because we're told that we should. So I guess in terms of like what we can discuss about it, firstly, if either of you have any experience with poems at all, do either of you write poetry separate to music?
No, I don't really.
I have in the past, but they always end up turning into songs later on.
Yeah.
It starts with poetry and then I end up playing a guitar part behind it, like it as a song, and then going on from there.
Yeah.
I don't think we've got any that have stayed put.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we tend to write words to sing out loud or say out loud. And poetry, I mean, like sonnets could arguably are written to be read out loud, but also to be read just like to ourselves.
Yeah.
And so those mindsets are quite different, which I think is why it can be weird to try and sing a poem. So in terms of like some of the rules and like anything that I've mentioned in any of the forms, do you think that there's any similarities in terms of lyric writing, that maybe restrictions you put on yourself or that you feel like the industry puts on lyric writing? Or about content, what we can write about?
Yeah. I think there's like a pressure to try and not make it rhyme when you write lyrics.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you're writing it, it just rhymes and it sounds good, but people think some people may think, oh, it's a bit cheesy making things rhyme. And then also like different topics, like we mentioned in the last sessions. I think there's a pressure. No, I don't know if there's a pressure to write about different topics, but because quite a lot of the music that's what's the word? It's like in the charts, like kind of popular music. It's all kind of about love and breakups or things like that. There might be a bit more of a pressure to write something a bit more unique and different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting when something you said just made me think that, like, when we write lyrics, often I will choose the one that sounds the best rather than working out what it is I'm trying to say. And I think this is why, I mean, lyric writing and poetry is a real art, because it's saying something very specific that you really want to say in a very particular way that's going to sound nice to people's ears. And I think, in my opinion, with the music side of songs, like familiar chord sequences are nice to hear, whereas familiar lyrics, not so much. It feels like if I've heard a phrase before, or if it's quite similar to other types of music, I'm less drawn to it. Does that make sense? Because I kind of want people to be saying something new.
Yeah, I think quite a lot of poetry stems from, in music, stems from like quite a lot of political opinions as well. Like artists like Billy Bragg or like Bob Dylan, their lyrics, if you took their lyrics away from their songs, it could quite easily be a poem.
Yeah. That's true.
Like folk music. It's kind of like more poetry.
Yeah, it's very true. There are different genres of music where poetry would arguably fit in slightly better. I guess I've never really thought about why, like why it would work for folk music and not for like popular music or rock music or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, even like sea shanties, like it's just like they're easy, memorable phrases for when they, for things like sea shanties where they could do their work while singing a poem. And that fits in, I think, maybe just because, I don't know, just because it's easier with the syllables or something like that.
Yeah.
I think you can fill in a lot more gaps with music if you're writing lyrics. You don't need to be quite as specific in what you're writing. You can give it that little bit of leeway because your music can.
Yeah.
Whereas writing poetry, you need to pretty much bang on what
you're
trying to say.
Them very different. Yeah.
That is true, because everyone is concentrating on the poet instead of like different aspects, which makes the music.
Yeah, that is true. You can get away with space in your words because there are so many other things going on, apart from when you look at rap music, where it feels like they fit as many words in as they can normally.
Yeah.
It's interesting thinking about rap and spoken word that is with music, that more people are. It's not about so much anymore about sort of how fast can you say words. It's much more like people like, I don't know, Chance the Rapper and Kendrick Lamar and all these people that are sort of bringing this new type of lyric that allows for much more space. And it's something that I would find really interesting to listen to, is spoken word artists that were thinking about the space, I think, and poetry as well.
Yeah.
Thinking about the pauses and the gaps rather than just having to constantly say words, and how music can really help with those little gaps in that space. So when we, obviously, you probably had a sort of initial response in your brain when I said the word poetry. What can you sort of explain what your presumption about poetry is and what your expectations are when you think about it? You go, oh, or I don't know.
I think it's quite it's a good way, it's a good form of expression. I definitely think it is a good way of expressing yourself and what you have to say without thinking about it too hard. And I also think I'd like to see the three different types you was explaining, some examples, but also poetry. I feel like you can write a poem with no rules as well, and it can still come across powerful. But I'm quite excited to write a poem.
Yeah.
Do something new.
What about you, Max? What do you reckon?
I read quite a lot of poetry, so most of the artists that I listen to for inspiration musically, I listen to for the lyrics, and most of them are also poets.
Yeah.
So I can see the two sides of the stone from the artists that I look at.
Yeah.
Which is really nice, and you can see which things you can tell they couldn't get away with in poetry form, and then put musical backing behind, and which seem like a song and then change into a poem where they've dropped the music because they didn't need it. It's the like diversity of it that I like. I think.
Yeah.
You sort of whatever you want, and there's that middle ground in between, of like beat poetry and any other things.
Yeah.
Just start adding music or take music away.
Yeah. A lot of spoken word artists will have instrument. Well, is it instrumental if there's spoken word on it? But instrumentals like underneath, which I really like. There's a band that I love called Listener, and that's really interesting to me because his voice, the way that he talks, is very particular. It's a bit like someone's done something very similar but more recently, and I can't remember his name. Is it Hobo something? Can't remember his name. If I remember I will let you know. But Listener has a very similar like sound to his voice. And it's really like gritty and really American, but it makes it very, very emotional to listen to. I think it's really good. But I've never really thought about like comparing poetry and lyrics. I think like for me, in terms of poetry, it just reminds me of like English in school, and that probably wasn't actually arguably the best education in poetry, because it wasn't poets teaching us, it was teachers. And unless you had a teacher that was really passionate about poems and knew loads of really obscure ones, you probably have learnt the same ones that your parents learnt in school. And so as actually something that's got me thinking about poems recently, there's a program called Dickinson, which is about Emily Dickinson. And it's a really interesting program anyway, because it's obviously based in the year that she lived. So it's like a period drama, but they've got really modern music in it. Like I think some Billie Eilish songs are on there. Wiz Khalifa plays death in it. Like it's a bit of a comedy drama, but then like her poems are sort of running through it, and I've never really known much about Emily Dickinson, but her poems at the time were like completely revolutionary, and no one was, I mean, firstly, I don't think women were really allowed to write poetry, but also like it's really interesting. We've just bought a book of her poems to have a read of, but I would recommend having a look at some of her poems if you fancy it. So in terms of the next 3 weeks, next week I'm gonna have a look at some longer styles of poetry. So for this week, it'd be really great if even if it's just a haiku or two, or if you wanted to try and crack out a sonnet or try an acrostic, or you can do one of each, whatever. On the cheat sheet that I'll send you, I've put some handy little boxes if you wanted to type it in the box, or you can do it on separate bits of paper, whatever you prefer. If we could have a go, and then I think the more that we try having a go, I think the more we'll start to, in our heads, explore how similar it is to the lyric writing process and how different it can be. And I think even if you want to write a poem and sort of be a bit free with it, I would love that. I'd also really love for you to try and do one where you're really strict with how you do it, to see, and then we can chat next week about all of our experiences of trying to do that, and then have a look at how we can use what I'd like to develop. It's hard on the first week, but what I'd like to develop over the next 3 weeks for poetry and lyrics is how we can use poetry and the process of writing it. Either we might find that we all love writing poetry anyway, but to actually put our heads in that space of writing words, I think. Because I know for me, I don't do that when I write lyrics, and I think maybe I should, because I think maybe it will make a bit more sense about what I'm saying, even if it's just like, what is it? I literally wrote a song the other day about being really hot and out of breath, because it was like, it's been like boiling hot weather at the moment, and then I ran up, we've got like 4 flights of stairs, and I was really, really hot when I got to the top, and so I wrote a song about literally just that feeling. And I remember being like, I feel like this is a really silly song. This is a really silly song subject. But it's not really. It's not like, I'm sure everyone has experienced that.
Yeah.
Of wanting to die of heat exhaustion or whatever. So yeah, that's sort of the idea, is that we're going to sort of delve into this poetry medium to see if we can, I don't know, have some revelations about our own lyric writing, or maybe just reassure ourselves of our lyric writing, whatever it might look like. And then for the 3 weeks afterwards, we'll be doing a similar thing, but with classical music. I'm not going to ask you to write a classical piece of music, but I mean, you can do.
Challenge is on. I think everyone needs to write a classical piece of music.
Absolutely. I've always wanted to be able to write like a really beautiful piece of classical music. I think I need to study it a bit more before I can work it out. But yeah, the idea behind that is because obviously there are different formats, there are different instruments that are used. There are, in certain types of classical music, there is lots of rules about what you can and can't do. There are musicians that were known for breaking the rules at the time, that sort of thing. So that we'll try and look into it and listen to some stuff and compare, and I'll try and find some practical bits that we can do like alongside it. But that will be the next 6 weeks, basically.
Cool.
So, and I'll put a gap in on your hand in week.
Okay.
Cool.
Right, let me stop recording and we can wrap it up.